The Shadow General. Prologue. The Sun General's last dawn. The field of Harrow's Fall was a canvas of carnage, painted in the muted hues of dawn and fresh blood. The air, thick with the metallic tang of iron and the acrid smoke of spent magic, was a physical weight in the lungs. General Kalen, the Sun General of the Luminian Empire, stood atop a small ridge, his brilliant gold and white armor spattered with mud and gore. In his hand, his great sword, Dawnbringer, felt heavier than forged steel should. Its inherent, gentle luminescence seemed dimmed, struggling against the oppressive gloom of the morning. Below, the final embers of the Northern Rebellion were being extinguished. His legionaries, the Dawn Guard, moved with the grim efficiency of veteran butchers, securing the field. They had won. Another victory for the unassailable glory of the Empire. Another page in the legend of Kalen the Unbroken. But Kalen felt anything but unbroken. His eyes, usually a clear and commanding sky blue, were shadowed with a fatigue no sleep could cure. They scanned the scene, not seeing a triumph, but a tapestry of waste. He saw the body of a young spearman from his own village, barely 17, his face frozen in a final, silent scream. He saw the smoldering remains of a farmhouse on the field's edge, caught in the crossfire of a mage's errant fireball. He heard the victorious cheers of his men, but they were drowned out by the moans of the dying and the cawing of carrion birds already beginning their feast. This was the third rebellion in a decade. Each one crushed with greater force, each victory celebrated with less genuine joy in the capital. The Empire, once a beacon of order and justice under the old emperor, was becoming a gilded fist under his son, Vorian. The taxes grew heavier, the decrees harsher, the purges of so-called seditious elements more frequent. Harrow's Fall hadn't been a battle for freedom, it had been a desperate, bloody reaction to tyranny. And Kalen had been the chief instrument of that tyranny. A glorious victory, General, a voice rasped beside him. Malachor, the Emperor's chief vizier and spymaster, stood there, his slender frame wrapped in black robes that seemed to drink the morning light. His face was a pale, unreadable mask, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He was a man who thrived in the aftermath, a vulture in human form. His radiance, Emperor Vorian, will be most pleased. The last ember of dissent is snuffed out. Is it? Kalen's voice was rough, stripped of its usual resonance. Or have we simply scattered the coals, waiting for the next wind to fan them into a new flame? Malachor's thin lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Philosophy from the Sun General. Unusual. The Empire requires order, not introspection. Your duty is to enforce that order. You have done so. Excellently, as always. Kalen turned his back on the vizier, his gaze lingering on the dead. His duty. It was a word that had once been his compass. Now, it felt like a chain. He had sworn an oath to protect the people of the Empire. But which people? The fat merchants and scheming nobles in the capital, or the starving farmers and desperate miners driven to rebellion in the provinces? He made a decision then, standing amidst the spoils of his hollow victory. He would return to the capital. He would stand before Emperor Vorian, not as a conquering hero but as a counselor. He would speak truth to power. He would make the emperor see the rot that was festering at the heart of his realm. It was a fool's hope, he knew. But it was the last flicker of the man he had once been. As his army began its long march home, Kalen felt the weight of every life lost on his shoulders. The Sun General was returning, but the man beneath. The armor was already beginning to fracture, the first shadows gathering in his soul. Chapter 1. The Gilded Cage. Ethelgerd, the capital of the Luminian Empire, was a city of breathtaking beauty and profound hypocrisy. Its white marble towers pierced the sky, their pinnacles gleaming in the sun. Grand boulevards, paved with luminous moonstones, were lined with flowering trees and bustling with richly dressed citizens. Canals of clear, blue water wound through the city, carrying elegant gondolas. From a distance, it was a paradise. But Kalen, riding at the head of his legion through the triumphal way, saw the city with new eyes. He saw the imperial guards, their faces hard and suspicious, scrutinizing the crowd. He saw the beggars huddled in the magnificent archways of temples, their hands outstretched. He saw the fear in the eyes of the common folk as his column passed, a fear that was quickly masked by forced cheers and thrown flower petals. The victory parade was a blur of noise and color that felt like a mockery. He sat stiffly on his white charger, the Sun General's helm under his arm, his face a carefully neutral mask. They marched from the Sun's Gate to the foot of the imperial citadel, a colossal structure of gold-flecked marble that housed the palace and the seat of government. The throne room was even more oppressive. It was a vast hall designed to intimidate. Pillars of solid white gold supported a vaulted ceiling depicting the empire's conquests in intricate mosaic. Light streamed from massive windows, reflecting off polished floors to create an almost blinding radiance. At the far end, seated on the sun throne, a monstrous construction of gold, jewels, and captured magical essences, was Emperor Vorian. Vorian was a man in his late 40s, but he looked younger, his features preserved by expensive alchemies and a profound sense of his own divinity. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, with blonde hair and cold, gray eyes. He wore robes of pure white silk embroidered with threads of sunlight, and a slender golden circlet rested on his brow. "General Kalen," Vorian's voice echoed in the hall, smooth and powerful. "You return to us once more, bathed in glory. The Empire is, as ever, in your debt." Kalen knelt, the formal gesture feeling like a physical strain. "Your Radiance. I have done my duty. Rise, my friend," Vorian said, a false warmth in his tone. "Let us look upon the face of our greatest protector." Kalen stood, meeting the Emperor's gaze. He saw no friend there, only a calculating sovereign. "The reports say the rebellion is Chedi Fen Sui utterly crushed," Vorian continued. "Malachor tells me you showed exceptional resolve. The cost was high, your Radiance," Kalen said, his voice cutting through the courtly silence. "On both sides. The people in the northern provinces are starving. The taxes are impossible. Their rebellion was born of desperation, not malice." A ripple of unease went through the assembled courtiers. One did not speak such truths in the Sun Throne room. Vorian's smile tightened. "The taxes are necessary to maintain the glory you see around you, General. To fund your legions. To ensure our borders are secure. Desperation is no excuse for treason. The law is the law. Perhaps the law should be tempered with mercy," Kalen pressed, a dangerous recklessness taking hold. "If we continue to grind our people into the dust, we will have no empire left to protect. We rule by the consent of the governed, your Radiance. A lesson your esteemed father knew well." The silence that fell was absolute. Mentioning the old emperor was a deliberate provocation. Vorian's face lost its patina of pleasantry. The gray eyes turned to ice. "My father," Vorian said softly, the words carrying through the hall, was a sentimentalist. He believed in hearts and minds. "I believe in power and order. You speak of mercy, General. I see fatigue. The burden of command has perhaps clouded your judgment." "My judgment has never been clearer," Kalen replied, his voice low but firm. "I am asking you, as your loyal servant, to look beyond these walls. To see the suffering your policies are causing. You are asking." Vorian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You do not ask your emperor. You obey." Malachor, standing just beside the throne, gave an almost imperceptible nod. From the shadows behind the pillars, figures emerged. They were not imperial guards. They were the onyx blades, the emperor's personal, magically enhanced enforcers, clad in featureless black armor. They moved with an unnatural silence, surrounding Kalen. "General Kalen," Vorian announced, his voice rising again to fill the hall, now laced with theatrical sorrow. "It grieves me to say that evidence has come to light. Evidence of your collusion with the northern rebels. Evidence that your victory at Harrow's Fall was a carefully staged ruse to cover your own treason." Kalen stared, stunned. It was so brazen, so utterly false, that for a moment he could not comprehend it. "That is a lie. Is it?" Vorian gestured, and Malachor produced a scroll. "Letters, outlining your plans to betray the Empire. Testimony from your own officers, who have shown their loyalty by confessing to your scheming. Your wealth, it seems, was not enough. You craved the Sun Throne itself." Kalen's hand went to the hilt of Dawnbringer, but a dozen onyx blades leveled their crystalline spears at him. The energy radiating from them was a null magic field, designed to suppress any resistance. He was trapped. "You would destroy the one man who truly protects this empire." Kalen's voice was a raw whisper, his eyes locked on Vorian. "For a lie. I am protecting the empire," Vorian hissed. "From you." He leaned back on his throne. "Strip him of his arms. Strip him of his armor. Erase his name from the histories. Let it be as if the Sun General never was." The onyx blades moved in. Kalen fought, of course. He was a whirlwind of lethal skill, but the null field sapped his strength, slowed his movements. He broke one soldier's arm, disarmed another, but a crystal spear butt slammed into his temple, and the world exploded into stars. As he was beaten to his knees, he saw the faces of the courtiers, some horrified, some gleeful, most carefully blank. He saw Molocher's cold, satisfied smile. The last thing he saw before a black hood was thrown over his head was Emperor Vorian, watching his downfall with the detached interest of a man watching a play. The Sun General was dead. The shadow of the traitor's noose awaited. Chapter 2. The Undercroft. They did not hang him. A public execution of a beloved hero was too risky. The story of his treason would be fed to the populace in careful drips, a poison to tarnish his memory. Instead, they devised a far crueler fate. He was thrown into the Undercroft. It was not a prison in any conventional sense. It was a myth, a horror story told to frighten disobedient children. Carved into the living rock deep beneath the citadel itself, it was a lightless, soundless oubliette, a place where the Empire sent those it needed to disappear forever. No one had ever escaped. No one had ever been released. Kalen's world shrank to an absolute, suffocating blackness. His cell was a rough-hewn cube of stone, 5 paces in each direction. There was no bed, no latrine, just a cold, damp floor and a slot in the door through which a thin, tasteless nutrient gruel was slid once a day, or what he assumed was a day. Time lost all meaning. The first cycle, a word he used to define the period between food deliveries, was pure, unadulterated agony. The silence was a physical pressure on his eardrums. The darkness was so complete it felt like a solid entity pressing against his eyeballs. He screamed until his throat was raw. He pounded his fists against the unyielding stone until they were bloody pulps. He wept for his lost honor, his betrayed loyalty, his stolen life. He thought of his wife, Alara, and their young son, Finn. What had become of them? Exiled, executed. The thought was a fresh torment, sharper than any physical pain. He clung to their memories, the light of their faces his only beacon in the endless night. But the human mind cannot long endure such sensory deprivation. His memories began to fray at the edges. Alara's laugh started to sound distorted. Finn's face became blurry. Panic set in. He was losing them. He was losing himself. He forced himself to adopt a discipline. He would exercise in the dark, using the confines of his cell to perform push-ups, squats, anything to feel his body, to mark the passage of time through muscle fatigue. He would recite every military treatise, every epic poem, every song he had ever known. But his voice, unused to speech, became a stranger's croak in the silence. Slowly, insidiously, the darkness began to change. It was no longer just an absence of light. It became a presence. At first, he dismissed it as madness, the final surrender of his mind. But it persisted. It was a subtle pressure at the edge of his consciousness, a faint hum just below the threshold of hearing. He stopped fighting it. What else was there to do? He sat in the center of his cell, cross-legged, and simply listened. He let the silence in. He let the blackness fill him. And it spoke. Not with words, but with impressions, with emotions, with ancient, patient knowledge. It was the shadow of the mountain, the cool dark of the deep earth, the secret space between the stars. It was the memory of light, and the peace that came after its passing. It taught him that to be unseen was not to be powerless. It was to be patient. It was to be aware. The light was bold and revealing, but the shadow was subtle and all-knowing. He learned to feel the vibrations in the stone, to interpret the faint currents of air that hinted at the vast, labyrinthine structure of the Undercroft. He could tell when his gruel was coming by the almost imperceptible shift in pressure long before the slot opened. His eyes, though useless, felt like they were changing, adapting to perceive the texture of the darkness itself. Years bled together. The proud, golden Sun General was gone, his body withered to a lean, hardened frame of sinew and bone. His hair, once sun-bleached gold, was now long, matted, and likely white. His mind, however, was not broken. It had been reforged. The straightforward, honorable general had been replaced by something else, a creature of immense patience, profound perception, and a deep, resonant connection to the void. He was no longer Kalen. He was a creature of the Undercroft. He was becoming shadow. Then, the earthquake came. It was a deep, grinding roar that seemed to tear the world apart. The floor of his cell heaved. Stones shrieked as they ground against one another. A massive crack, wide enough for a man to slip through, tore open the ceiling of his cell, a jagged scar in the absolute blackness. Dust and fragments of rock showered down. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking up at the rupture. It wasn't light that came through, it was a different quality of darkness, a draft of slightly less stagnant air. It was the first change in over a decade. Escape was no longer a fantasy. It was a possibility. A test. Using fingers and toes that had become as sensitive as a blind man's, he began to climb. The rock was sharp and unforgiving, tearing his flesh. But the pain was a distant thing, an old acquaintance. He moved with a spider-like grace he didn't know he possessed, finding holds in the sheerest faces, his shadow-infused senses guiding him unerringly upwards through the fractured earth. He climbed for what felt like an eternity, through narrow chimneys and along precarious ledges. Finally, he pulled himself out of a fissure in the ground, hidden behind a collapsed section of a forgotten, buried aqueduct. He was still underground, but he was out of his cell. The air was different. It tasted of damp moss and ancient stone, of freedom. He stood, his limbs trembling not from fatigue, but from the sheer, overwhelming sensory input. He could feel the vast, empty space around him. He was in a cavern, part of the Undercroft's outer ruins. And ahead, a sliver of faint, gray light. Moonlight. He moved towards it, a wraith gliding through the ruins. He emerged from a crack in a hillside overlooking Edelgard. The city lay in the valley below, its white towers glowing softly under the moon and the myriad lights of its streets. It was still beautiful. It was still alive. He looked down at his own hands. They were pale, almost gray, the skin stretched tight over bone and tendon. He was a ghost. The Sun General was dead, his body interred in the lightless tomb of the Undercroft. The man who stood on that hillside was someone new. Someone forged in betrayal and tempered in absolute darkness. He was a weapon aimed at the heart of the Empire. He was the Shadow General. Chapter 3. A city of ghosts and lies. The world was an assault. The cacophony of night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves in the wind, was deafening. The scent of pine, damp earth, and night-blooming flowers was so potent it made his head spin. And the moonlight, it wasn't bright, but after a decade of perfect blackness, it felt like staring into the sun. Kalen, or the being he was now, sank into the deepest shadows at the base of the trees, allowing his senses to adjust. His first priority was survival. His second, information. He needed to know what had become of his world. He moved through the outskirts of the city with an instinctual stealth that was a product of his long imprisonment. He didn't walk, he flowed from one patch of darkness to the next, a part of the landscape. The few late-night travelers on the road never saw or heard him. He was a whisper, a trick of the light. His first goal was the Old Quarter, the part of the city where the guilds of masons, weavers, and smiths held sway. It was also a place where loyalty to the crown was often tempered by a healthy cynicism. He needed clothes, food, and most of all, news. He found what he needed in a small, closed market square. A laundry line behind a tenement house offered rough-spun trousers and a tunic that, while too large, would serve. Stealing felt alien to the man he had been, but the Shadow General understood necessity. In a deserted alley, he shed his filthy prison rags and put on the stolen clothes. They felt coarse and strange against his skin. Food was easier. He knocked a ripe fig from a tree overhanging a garden wall and devoured it, the sweetness and almost painful ecstasy on his tongue. His shrunken stomach rebelled, but he forced himself to eat slowly, to savor the first real food in over 10 years. Dawn was approaching. He needed a place to hide, to observe. He found it in the bell tower of a derelict temple to a forgotten god. It offered a vantage point over a busy plaza and was considered haunted, ensuring he would be left alone. As the sun rose, painting the city in its golden light, he watched. Ethelgard by day was worse than he had imagined. The beauty was still there, but it was a brittle facade. Imperial guards were everywhere, their presence oppressive. They moved in pairs, their eyes constantly scanning, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. He saw them stop a cart driver, demanding his papers, their tone brusque and threatening. He saw them roughly shove a beggar away from the steps of a money-lender's shop. The people moved with a hurried, anxious gait, their eyes downcast. The forced gaiety of the victory parade was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. This was not the vibrant, confident city he had left. This was a city living in fear. He needed to hear their voices. As dusk fell, he descended from his perch, becoming one with the flowing crowds. He drifted through Tav.